So I'm just probably going to re-ask some of the questions I find interesting, just
Okay.
just for fun. So I was wondering what impact the Delta variant is having on the education sector in Central Florida. Um, I was also wondering how classes are going to work for those who are in isolation because I know some of my teachers aren't they're like, no, like you get COVID, you can't Zoom in. Like, we're not doing that this year. You're just gonna have to
Mhm.
sit out of class for 2 weeks, have someone relay the information to you. So I was kind of
Okay.
wondering, is there a specific um method for classrooms to follow, or is it just kind of like you do whatever you want?
Gotcha. So let me first answer the educational question. And so I'll
Mhm.
speak more for like Orange County as a whole, and then I'll talk about Rollins specifically. So as you know, children under the age of 12 are not eligible for the vaccine. So the data just came out and I can send you the article if you're interested in it. Was showing a positivity rate that's pretty high in a younger age group. The highest age group is under 12, and then 12 to 19 is the second highest group that we're seeing in a positivity because of low vaccine. Obviously, they're not eligible or a low vaccination rate in general, right? Our students are doing an amazing job, right? They are getting vaccinated, and we are seeing progress here in our Rollins community. So when you're looking at like Orange County schools, right? Because even with mask wearing right now, the mask mandate for Orange County is going into full effect August 30th until October 30th. That was just news. We'll hopefully see a further reduction in that. But because the Delta variant is so contagious, even with mask wearing and just little kids being close together, there's a higher chance of them spreading it. And so they will automatically get quarantined, right? They're not going to have the option of being exempt from a vaccination status. So you're going to see more kids going out in the younger education system. For Rollins, the benefit to being vaccinated is you are exempt from quarantining as long as you have not having any symptoms, right? You monitor for symptoms, you get tested, 3 to 5 days after exposure, all those good things, right, to prevent further spread. But because you have the vaccine on board, it's going to provide an extra layer of protection for you. So again, we're seeing more students, have that into effect so they'll have less quarantine. So if any student tests positive or is in a close contact scenario where they're either symptomatic or they haven't been vaccinated and they need to quarantine, so either isolate or quarantine, we have a system, the same system we used last year, right, where we enter it through um, a system for our COVID operations team to one, do faculty notifications to ensure that these students are either quarantined or isolated in the proper location, whether it's on or off campus, that they're given, meal deliveries and access to medical care if needed, right? All of those things that are important for our quarantine and isolation. In regards, obviously, I'm not an educator here in the traditional sense of being in a classroom, so I can only speak of what the absence notification policy is so that there is not a standard everyone's going to be able to WebEx in or Zoom in, right? But when a faculty notification goes out to a faculty member that you are either in quarantine or isolation, and they all have to come through the wellness center, even if a student's tested outside of our campus, um, the faculty notification is for the student and the faculty member to work on a way during that quarantine isolation timeframe to continue the learning, but the absence will not count against them for that specific time frame. So there are ways that teachers and educators can share that information, whether that is they feel comfortable and want to WebEx because that's just easier for them, or if they want to say, here's the assigned reading and we're going to meet at Thursday at 4 o'clock and we'll do a catch up, office hour kind of thing, right? It's really up to the professor. And the reason is there's so many different ways of, educating, and one class does one way and another class, and WebEx doesn't work for everybody, right? And so that's really we're leaving it up to the faculty members and the students to work out that best scenario of the delivery of that educational module at this time. So, did that answer your question?
Yes, that was good to know. I was just kind of curious for
Yeah,
myself.
yeah.
Um, I also was wondering what the talk is of booster shots in the community because I actually know my friend's mom got one and it was awful for her. Like it was worse than the second vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason she got it was because she was like immunocompromised. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think that's the only that's as of right now the only people who can get it are like people who are
correct.
immunocompromised and they have like permission from their doctors. So
Mhm.
I was
Yep.
wondering what that's going to look like, especially
Yeah.
because I know the vaccine only protects you for a certain amount of time.
Correct. So, with all vaccines, obviously, as we're learning more and more time, right, we'll have even more data in a year or 2 years, and we'll really be able to map this out, and, be able to guide people along the way in the future, right? But what we do know now, based on the individuals that did the Pfizer and the Moderna and the Johnson & Johnson studies initially, right? They've been watching their antibody levels post-vaccine. And what they have seen is around 8 months, they start to decline. It's not that they're non-existent, right? So that's where looking at all the data of all these hundreds of thousands of people that were in these studies to get these vaccines, they were looking and going, okay, we're at, for the data we have, 8 months, we want to make sure we continue that level of protection that the vaccine is providing. So they're recommending boosters at 8 months post your second vaccine. So really, it's about 9 months after you started, depending on the vaccine you got, right? If you got Johnson & Johnson, it might be a little shorter. Um, and so for the general public, that really shouldn't start until probably, oh gosh, you're talking about probably December, January, maybe even into February, right? Depending on where people fell into the criteria. Were they an educator? Were they an 18-year-old student, right? So it's going to be a different time frame for everybody. Healthcare workers will be starting the week of September 20th, just to put that in perspective, because healthcare workers and those individuals over the age of 65 were in that first criteria group, nursing home individuals. And so you'll see those groups getting vaccinated first, and then it will start trickling down the same kind of effect it did before. Currently, you're absolutely right. It's people that are immunocompromised, and it's what's called severely immunocompromised, right? And the reason that more than likely this individual had symptoms is what they have found in all the research as well is individuals that are immunosuppressed or immunocompromised are not forming as much of an antibody level protection and lasting as long as the general public, right? And so therefore they need a booster sooner, especially with this Delta variant, to give them a little bit higher level of protection than they have, because they're running on empty pretty quickly, right? So that population will probably be more symptomatic with the boosters than the general public would be, right? Because we're going to have that kind of threshold that kind of hopefully just is a nice smooth level for us.
Okay. And then I you mentioned the dashboard when you
Mhm.
answered the questions earlier, and I just noticed a lot of people have been actually posting like their vaccination because when I first got on campus, I think it was something like 50% of
Uh-huh.
students were vaccinated, and now it's up to 73, and I'm like, that couldn't have happened all in like 1 week.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you had any words of motivation for students
Mm.
to get vaccinated because or even staff and commuter students
Mhm.
because it looks like they're around 60 to 65%.
And I think our numbers are actually probably higher in those groups even, right? Well, so let's talk about our residential students are being required to test if they have not uploaded their vaccine cards, right? And so many of them were already vaccinated or got vaccinated
Yeah.
in a short time period before moving on campus. And I was like, well, I don't want to get tested. I've been vaccinated, right? So it's like, oh, let me upload my vaccine card. So we're seeing that in our community as well. I really have a lot of, you know, confidence in our community, right? And I do think if we can't mandate it, which we can't based on state Florida law, right? So that's where the difficulty lies. How can we really get that sense of where our community stands? We know where Orange County stands, we know where Winter Park stands, but how does Rollins, this little sub community, really stand? And so when you see our residential numbers going up, that really gives me hope and really showing that our students are motivated, one, to be here on campus, be in person, and really prevent illness, not only for themselves, but for the campus community as a whole, which is really should be our number one motivator, right? If we don't want to do it for ourselves, right? COVID's not a big deal, which you'll hear some students say, I'd be fine, I had it before, right? All those things. Think of that important person in your life that you couldn't live without, and that's why you want to do the vaccine, right? If you don't want to do it for your own personal protection, you want to do it for that member of your family or your best friend that doesn't have as much protection, and that's why we do it, right? And so we want to, and on top of that, obviously I'm a healthcare worker. I was an old ER nurse many years ago, and they are suffering big time. And so what we also want to do is make sure we have access to the care we need in those emergent bases outside of COVID, right? So we break our foot and we need to go to the emergency room. Do we want to wait 12 hours with a broken foot because they're bombarded by COVID, right? No, we don't. And that's what we're doing if they can even care for us at that point. So it's really, again, personal, who is your immediate community that you want to preserve and protect, and then our healthcare facilities.
Okay, and that actually led to another question that I had of um, convincing people who have already had COVID to get the COVID vaccine because I have
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of like family even and friends who are like, I've already had COVID. I don't need the vaccine. Like I've already done it. So what are the facts behind that? Is it the
Yep.
same as like the COVID vaccine where it's 8 months after then you,
Great
or is it
question.
less?
Great question. So the data from COVID infection, specifically when you're thinking like the alpha variant, the one we had last fall, right? As an example, typically that alpha variant, one person would infect maybe two people, okay, with COVID. Now the delta variant is one person will infect 8 people. And what we do know is back in the fall of last year of 2020, the active COVID infection would give us personal antibody protection up to 90 days, right? Most people drop off after that 3-month mark, okay? Unless you're going to go check antibody test every day, which is not humanly feasible, you don't know when that's going to drop off and what level of protection that drops off and when that infection rate occurs, right? So what we do know is the COVID um, infection provides this level of antibody protection, okay, for that 90 days. But COVID vaccines provide 2 to 4 times the level of antibody production than the actual COVID infection, right? So what I try to tell our students that had COVID last fall in 2020, right, this is providing superpowers, right? So that way, when you are around somebody with the Delta variant, right, you're even more unlikely to get it, right? So that's a huge thing. So really, really planning ahead and looking at that 90 days and beyond. I have seen students, we had students last year that got COVID 94 days later, right? Because it was a different variant. So it is going to happen if they had COVID more than 90 days ago. With the Delta variant, it is super sticky. It is super contagious. It spreads across a room, right? And that's where it's concerning for if we don't wear masks, if we're not distancing, and we don't have a high vaccination rate, that we are going to spread it, and it's a highly contagious variant, just like chickenpox and measles. So big thing there, and that's why we're being aggressive for our campus community to have higher vaccination rates because we want everybody to be safe. We want everybody to be in person. We want to have a normal semester, right? We all do, and this is our way to get there.
Okay, and I was wondering, this is again a personal question. I so there are some vaccines that are required, like the measles, the chickenpox, all that. Um, what is the reasoning behind the COVID vaccine not being required? Was it because it wasn't approved by the FDA, and now that it is that
It had
okay?
nothing to do with FDA approval. It actually had to do with Governor DeSantis signing a bill into law. I believe it was in late May. It might have been mid-May. I'd have to look at the specific date. It's House Bill 2006, I believe, or Senate Bill 2006. And it essentially blocks all private and public educational institutions from requiring the COVID vaccine. And so we're one of 2 states, is my understanding, that have gone that route, right? And so again, that might be a block for us to require it, but then we have to go to our campus community and say, okay, what can we do on a personal community level to really encourage vaccine rates from going up? So that's where the voluntary FoxLink upload comes into place, right? The exemption from testing, right? Same thing for our athletes. They're gonna, if they're not vaccinated or have not uploaded their vaccine card through FoxLink, they're gonna be required to have routine COVID testing throughout the semester. And that's just part of our risk reduction, right, for our campus community as a whole. So,
Hmm. Okay. All right. I think that was everything.
okay.
All the rest of the questions you pretty much covered perfectly. So yeah.
Awesome.
All
Okay.
right.
Well, if they have any follow up, it can come through you or through whoever, and I'd be happy to answer something else. But
All
hopefully,
right.
if we convince one more person to get vaccinated,
Exactly.
then we've done our job, right?
Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye.